Welcome to the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast. We're happy you're here. On the podcast, we're certain that you'll relate to the caregiver stories and find comfort with your honorary sisters. Now, before we start, I want to remind you to go to our website, confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com, and sign up for our newsletter. It's full of useful information that you can immediately use. Now, let's learn more about today's guest.
Well, do we have quite a guest today, JJ?
I know.
God, we have our friend Janet Brennend with us, and I'm going to tell you, I know she has quite the confession. I mean, I think she's probably had some good and some bad and probably some ugly, but I think we can all relate. And so I'm going to tell you, folks, if you're watching this on YouTube, that's fantastic. But listening in, we're going to end up referencing her as our Aunt Jane. And Janet is like family to us at this point. She is an honorary, she's like an aunt, like to us, like she's a mama to us. And she is full of love and full of wisdom. Jay, why don't you talk a little bit about Miss Janet?
Okay, so you're going to want to listen to this one because she's got some stuff that she's going to tell you.
Oh, I'm telling you.
And stuff that maybe we don't want to, do publicly.
Oh, we're doing it. We're confessing.
So listen to this. So Janet, she's worked for 21 years as a local long-term care. Well, her current role is a local long-term care ombudsman. But she's got this personal story that is totally reflected in the work that she does.
Yeah. And
I'm going to give you two words. Janet advocates. That's it. She is the voice for individuals. Yeah. I mean, she's fierce. Yes. I mean, she's the individual that she advocates for people with disabilities, for individuals that are 60 plus years old, for family caregivers. She gets stuff done. Mm-hmm. Personally, Janet has been a family caregiver to her father, to her daughter, to her husband, and a lot of other people. Janet says that she balances her work and her personal life with some amazing pastimes. You're going to want to hear about these so I need to hear about them for sure. But Janet, I guess I want to start in the beginning. I feel like the Golden Girls.
In the beginning.
Sicily.
Picture it. No, it's picture it. 1932.
There you go.
Sophia.
It's interesting that you ladies mentioned 1932 because that was when my father was born.
Okay.
Really?
There you go.
Oh, that's perfect. Now we can really say picture it, 1932.
So is he kind of the start, Janet? Is he kind of where it started with your caregiving?
That's a good question. When I began thinking about what that first opportunity was, and it was actually with what we call the baby sister. Mm-hmm. And there were 7 of us children. And so I was maybe 7 or 8 years old when she was born. Mm-hmm. And my brother, who is a year and 1 month younger than I am, we pretty much took care of her. We bathed her. We provided care to her, made sure she was safe and everything, mm-hmm. changed her diapers and we did laundry and everything. So that was the very first moment that I remember being an actual caregiver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. How old were you again?
I was about 7 or 8.
And what birth order out of the 7 are you? Because birth order is important.
Well, yes, it is. So I'm the middle child.
Me too.
I display all the characteristics of a middle child, but with middle children, so I'm the oldest of the 4 youngest and the youngest of the 4 oldest.
Oh, look, so the baby and the oldest, yet the middle. I've never met someone who is a middle oldest baby.
That's quite a title. Janet,
Welcome, Janet.
I'm gonna put that on my name tag.
I know, oldest baby. I know it all and can be blamed for nothing, and I'm probably the one who did it.
Well, to be honest with you, I was the mom of the youngest 4, youngest 4 of us, and we hung together, and sort of like the older 3, No, not so much. We didn't really hang together because of the age differences and
Okay.
everything.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But I have had my moments of mischief. Yeah.
Oh,
Fantastic.
moments of
Fantastic.
mischief. I do like that.
So you grew up, you took care of her during that time. So you kind of moved from there. Who was next? I guess who was next?
Who was next?
Who was the next person I cared for?
Yeah.
So it was actually my dad.
Okay.
My dad was the manager over a plant. We actually, I was born in Central Virginia, and so he was a manager over a plant that makes, the vermiculite in plants, those little white pellets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like an insulator or whatever, and they also use it to insulate blocks as like cinder blocks and everything.
Yeah.
So he was doing so well in that plant, they moved him to North Carolina. So we moved from Hopewell, Virginia, which is just right out of Richmond, and then moved into North Carolina. In that particular plant, there was an explosion, and he was in the midst of that fire explosion. And he was burned quite a bit over his body, and the injuries and the burns were so bad, the zipper on his jacket got caught in his neck. He was burned on his face and his hands. And at the age of 9 or 10, we were the youngest kids were providing wound care to our dad.
Wow. Wow.
And you think about it now. I mean, what does a 9 or 10-year-old know? And at that time, there wasn't home health care coming in.
Oh, absolutely.
So it left at least three of us, three of the younger ones, doing wound care for a dad and dressing his hands. And that was the second one. Yeah.
Do you think that really is where that empathy started? Because you definitely have, I feel like, a heart of, you're always helping, like now even that advocacy. But do you think that's where that heart started always, that you're always caring?
Well, and you'll get an insight into me that, only those who are closer to me, like close friends and personal friends, find out the real me. And the real me is a sappy old fool.
Aren't we all?
Are you
I am
like
as well.
wait a second. Are you like an M&M, like a hard candy outer shell and really soft on the inside?
I can be, but
Okay.
you know what, Natalie? I like to equate it to, when you roast marshmallows.
Yeah.
When I need to be, I'm, how you get it, that burnt crisp.
Oh,
on
I
the
do love
outside.
crispy on the outside.
And then you pull that away and it's all the goo on the inside.
Yes.
That's the best descriptor of me.
Oh.
But I've always felt different, and I've always felt very empathetic and patient and quiet. And most people don't believe it, but I'm an introvert. My personality is an introvert. And so I do a lot of introspection and looking from within. So I've always kind of been that way. I think it started when I was in kindergarten, and not kindergarten, first grade. We didn't have kindergarten then. Ms. Anthony was our first grade teacher, and she asked me to help the others in the classroom to read. I mean, she was the one who taught me how to read, because we didn't have a literacy rich environment when growing up and going to school. It was, I get to help them. I get to do something that I know how to do.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I remember peer support.
Yeah.
The very first time.
Wow. That is, what, isn't it funny? This is almost like being inside oriented, and inside oriented is a kind of mental healthy word that, like, you're being like, oh, I'm insightful and I realize things, because there's so many things. Like, I just jotted down, I'm like, oh, she's a natural born caregiver, natural born helper. And you just referred to yourself. You're like, I did peer support. And that's what it is. It is, you were helping your other classmates because you had that fostered into you as a child. You helped with raising your sibling. You helped with your dad. You helped, you know what I mean? And so you're just You were born to be a helper. It's a servant heart. To me, I think it's a servant heart.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Well, and to be honest with you, and I'll set aside my role, my work role.
Yeah.
But I walk with a spirit within me every day.
Absolutely.
And the one that everyone sees in what I do and who I really am is not that real Appalachian girl that played baseball, football when I was growing up. And you mess with my family, my money.
Yeah. We're the same way. We may talk about each other, but dang it, you're not talking about them.
No. Well, that isn't that the Southern way.
That is.
And I'll defend something to the nth degree, and I have it within me.
Yeah.
That oppositional defiant child within me to do a WWE SmackDown if I need to.
Oh.
I very rarely.
Ooh, I feel like we need to see that, Janet. Hold on.
I know. I respect that. Janet's got sass.
I do it with words and with compassion.
Yeah.
That's a bless your heart. That's a bless your heart, Janet. We all got that.
Love her. So we're good Southerners. You can totally tell. It's really funny, actually. So it's interesting. So and after you said it, I apologize. How old were you when when you helped your dad?
I was about 9 or 10.
Thank you. And so you help him along with that. And I can only imagine how respectfully kind of traumatizing that is, because to see that as a child and to be able to kind of absorb that and move forward with that, I think that would be hard, but you did, because I think you're a resilient lady personally. I think you've got a lot of resilience in you.
I appreciate that. And the one thing is that, when I was kind of looking at the questions or information in preparation for today, it caused me to question where my mother was in that role as caregiver. And I don't recall that.
That's interesting. So it's almost, do you think that the number of children, depending on the age span or whatever, even the number of children might have overwhelmed her to be able to be a caregiver? Do you think that was overwhelming? Because honestly, back then people had litters of children. My dad's one of 5, my mom's one of 5, my ex-husband, it was one of his family, on both sides, one of 10, one of 15. Like you had a whole litter of kids. You could either have a baseball team or a basketball team.
It could be, and when I look back, actually my mother was pregnant. If all of the children would have lived, 11 children.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I'm thinking, you're thinking along the right lines, is that she had so much that she was trying to do, keep a family going.
Yeah.
I didn't feel it back then, but we were a poor family. My dad earned $100 a week.
Yeah.
And trying to support a family. So I guess, in a large family, you do what you need to do. You love and care about each other. Mm-hmm. It certainly made a difference in my relationship with my mother along the way.
Yeah.
Almost, it seems like sometimes the way that siblings, although she's still your mom, but when somebody doesn't, you don't want to say pick up their portion, because she was doing a different role, but you're kind of hands-on, but she maybe was not that caregiver role for your dad specifically.
Well,
she didn't. My husband would have, my last husband would have referred to it as a PDA, public displays of affection. She was not that person, but my dad was.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So your dad was lovey. Was your dad the lovelier one than your mom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, he was.
Yeah. All right.
And so, so you continue growing up, and so you move on and you're into adulthood. Where does your caregiver journey pick back up as you move on?
Well, that's interesting. It still wasn't in adulthood. for a good number of years, our mother was ill as well. Cancer. She had kidney cancer. She had skin cancer. So we were in that role of, it just seemed like a lifetime of caregiving. And then I did step into adulthood. I moved away from home. It was a decision I had to make for my own well-being and for my future.
Yeah.
So I moved to North Carolina, met my husband, became a mom of my son, who is a retired U.S. Marine.
I love that.
And so even before that, when I moved away from home, I went to North Carolina to live with my sister. And so for 2 years, I worked second shift. They called them sewing rooms, mills, in that area. That was big in that area. And so I would care for her daughters during the day, my nieces, who were like my own children, and get them ready for school, get them, they'd come home from school, and then I'd go to work and work second shift. And I did that for 2 years. Yeah. And when I met my husband, I had my son, and then into adulthood, raised my son, and then later my daughter came along. Yeah.
So tell us about your daughter, because your stories with your daughter are fantastic. Amazing. I feel like that's when you almost lost your responsibility. I mean, you got a little crazy with some of the things.
Wait, yes. If we're going to confess it, I probably did. And, when she was a year old,
okay,
and my son was there. He was a young fellow, but we were a family. I was a single parent and raising 2 children.
Okay.
And on her first birthday, prior to that, when she went for her checkups and things like that, they could notice that her development wasn't normal. And so we went to, on her first birthday, we went to, back then it was the Child Development Clinic in Roanoke. Yep. And they did an entire battery of tests, and it was the entire day. And I was there by myself. At the end of the day, and I can remember the doctor's name, and he looked at me, and at that time, my last name was Wilson. And when somebody says in this tone, "Now, Miss Wilson," it sends chills through me, even to this day. Well, I'm not Wilson now, it's Brennend. But he said, "Your daughter will never be able to take care of herself. She'll never walk. She'll never be able to communicate with you. And you will have to take care of her for the rest of her life." And I looked at him and I said, "I'm going to prove you wrong."
Absolutely.
I love that.
Because in my daughter, I saw something. And back then, they termed it as cerebral palsy. Now they'd have a different terminology for it. And in effect is what either before birth or during birth, she suffered a stroke. Is basically what CP is. And so from then on, I made life decisions. I was working at that time and made a decision to quit work so that we could access benefits that she needed so that she could progress, so she could have physical therapy and she could have the services and supports. So that's when that first moment, I think, that I said, no, in healthcare, no, I'm going to do my part. We're going to support the best that she can be. And to be honest with both of you, JJ and Natalie, she and my son, I would say, made me better than I would have been without them.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, and I hear you say though, that even then you left your job because you did that so you could access benefits. I don't know what that year was, but it sounds like, and it reminds me of Mike with Soaring Families.
Yeah.
First of all, he said to those doctors, "Oh, I'll show you." And so you really said, all right, well, here's the beginning of my advocacy, but also where the benefits, like, is that when you really had to start, okay, I got to dig in and find these? Were people raising their hands and saying, oh, let us give you this?
No.
Okay.
That doesn't occur. And JJ, even to this day, that doesn't always occur.
Nope.
But that's in my role as a long-term care ombudsman and as an elder abuse prevention specialist, we want to do that outreach. We want to be proactive and say to families, you don't have to do this alone.
That's right.
So at that time, that was in I will be honest with you. It was 1982. I was still working. I had a management position full-time, and I couldn't get the services that were needed because I was working. And
that's still, Janet, you and I both know, especially in mental health but even physical health, our primary care, the equity is not present where it needs to be. I mean, I think we've made a lot of strides, but the fact that people have to quit their jobs or to get benefits, I've always thought it was strange. I mean, Jan and I are in Virginia. And so even in Virginia, to get better services, you actually have to be on Medicaid. And so I can tell you, your insurance benefits are, if your commercial insurance is not as good as if you are poor. And that doesn't make any sense to me because we're paying for the benefits. So it's crazy.
And I grew up in, my family, my mom and dad, they were from rural Southwest Virginia.
Right.
Yeah.
And pure Appalachian family. And we grew up with the ethics, ethics may be a wrong word. We grew up with the values of honest day's work for an honest day's pay.
Right.
Right.
And so it was a hard decision for me at that moment because I've been taught that you need to work for what you have.
That's right.
Right.
And so what I did I'm thinking it was 1982 because she had just first birthday going in, that was 1981. And then going into the new year, 1982, I took vacation. I took 2 weeks vacation. And I took that time to sit down with people, talk about what benefits could be available if I were not working.
Wow.
What benefits could be available, not to me, but for her.
Yeah.
And ultimately it was for my son as well.
Yeah.
And then by the end of 2 weeks, exploring, asking questions, meeting with social workers and knowing that we'd just come out of that assessment, I said, and this isn't a hard decision for me.
Oh.
So I went back and talked with, I was actually a department manager. It was like the forerunner to Walmart back then. And I went to him and I said, I want to tell you that I'm quitting the job because I need to take care of my family.
Yeah.
And I need to take care of my daughter and do the best that I can do for her, but ultimately for my family. He understood. I
Absolutely.
still see him to this day.
Yeah.
And so that's where things started to change.
Yeah.
And access to services and support. And when I say my really strong role of advocacy began when I battled the public school system. They refused to provide her, even after us showing after maybe about 2 years worth of notes from a physical therapist, occupational therapist, that she could benefit from related services in the public school system.
Right.
When they refused, and it came up again, now Miss Wilson.
Da-da.
Da-da.
There's 2 words that the schools hate to hear: due process. And if you don't know those words, folks, the school people do. And that's because the feds say every child has a right to a free and public education, and they have a right. And so I say that, and everybody be like, all the school people are like, Natalie, but every child has a right to have their needs met. And I think we hear that from people. And I'm going to tell you right now, Miss Janet, I told you she was fierce at the beginning.
Yeah.
So
she only gets more
fierce.
No, but I do it in a gentler way.
You do.
And I'll tell you,
fierce is not bad.
And listen, we're going to talk about confessions. And I will say to parents, it is not a good idea to lean across the desk at the school psychologist and put your hand, not just place it firmly, but slam your hand down on the desk and say, let me tell you what kind of lawsuit I could have.
Oh, yeah.
Told you.
So, and I adore this gentleman, and he really wanted to do what was best, but he also had other children to look at. And so I learned a gentler way of being an advocate, but also very mindful of what my role as a caregiver for her and a caregiver for my son meant to them when they had to encounter the aftermath.
Yes, because there is the aftermath.
Yes.
They have to actually go to school. So.
And there's a gentler way of doing it and talking about the needs and having those conversations. There is a much better way. I've learned that over the years.
Dexter's mom, who's 84, she says, just be sweet and kind and gentle. But that woman, I mean, she has a way to get things done. So sweet and kind and gentle, Janet. Sounds like you have got it down pat, but you get it done.
So let me tell you the secret. And we're going to give a confession.
Ready.
When, we as women, when we get upset, we have a tendency for our voices to go up about 8 octaves.
Yes.
Okay. And when we're hurt and excited or whatever, and we as Southern people have a tendency to talk a little bit quicker. But when persons hear me slow down my speech and I articulate my words and I look someone straight in the eye and I take a back step on one of my feet, I change my position. They know I mean. My son calls me mean mom. And I said, I mean what I say, and I say what I mean. So there's a gentler way.
Right.
And one good phrase that I always encourage other caregivers to use is, help me understand.
Oh, I love that one. I use that all the time.
And it all comes down to reading from the same page of understanding, because we may be reading from a different book, and we're in partnership here. We don't have to do this alone as a caregiver. And I've lived it firsthand, and I hope that's what I convey to the persons that I talk to on a daily basis, or that I come in contact with, or that have come to know me over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So, I know for a fact that you made sure that your daughter was able to receive the free and appropriate education. And so I think some of the most interesting parts, and we've heard Janet shared a story. We participated in the CARE colloquium, and that's when we first met Janet. And I thought, I need to be her best friend, because she is a fierce advocate and she speaks my language. And you know what? She just simply wants the best. And, not only for our children, but for everyone. And that's where our community is blessed to have her in the role that she's in. It is the right position, because she advocates for everyone equally, and because everyone deserves a chance. Yeah. And so I want you to talk about some of the ways that you supported your daughter to try to offer her what in Virginia we call normalcy. And normalcy really is normalcy for like anyone of varying abilities. Like we all have varying abilities, but how do we help her live like everyone else who is within abilities, has the normal, what we consider standard abilities?
So two situations stand out the most for me, but there were little things along the way.
Yeah.
And then after she finished in the public school system,
Yeah.
there was another moment. But what I wanted to do was empower her.
Yeah.
And give her the strength, but help her try to fit into, and if we can't find a better word, within a normal world.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know what it is either.
No.
But to be able to function within the regular school setting.
Right.
And I helped other families, other parents advocate as well, that I hope in our public school system made a difference. The first moment that I advocated was when the director of special education looked at me in a room and said, "Now, Miss Wilson, we cannot justify the cost of occupational therapy and physical therapy for just one child." And I'm trying to argue the point, trying to pull out Public Law 94-142, which is what it was back then. And I said, I know that you are required to provide related services according to the federal government, for so that children with special needs have access to a free and appropriate education. And I said, I have documented proof of those related services that improved her condition. It helped her compensate for the physical disability and the related the related conditions that come along with her type of cerebral palsy. And she says, "I'm not going to do it." And I said, "Well, I know that there are more children who can benefit from related services. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to make sure that my daughter has access to that." She was in the preschool program then. She was 3 years of age, and back then it was within the public school system. So I didn't let it stop. Back then, an agency was referred to as the Virginia Department for the Rights of the Disabled. It is now the Disability Law Center of Virginia. And the lady that I worked with was Judy Barnheiser. And I told her that they were denying my daughter access to a free and appropriate education by refusing to provide related services. She stepped in on behalf of my daughter, ordered the public school system to provide those related services, not only to her, but to other students. And the director of special ed still dug her heels in, and she would not do it. The public school system came within 3 to 5 days of losing all of their special ed funding if those services weren't provided.
Wow.
And they gave in and started providing related services to my daughter and to other identified students in the public school system. And that was in the early to mid 1980s.
So, I think it's important to note, because some of, especially of parents, may sit here and say, well, you're just doing your job as a parent. And, I think if you think about the definition of a caregiver, it does include, most people don't think of children because you think about the aging population. I mean, you work with the aging population. The reality is that it's also, it's inclusive of individuals with disabilities, because you have to, sadly, it's sad that I have to say, you have to go above and beyond the traditional parenting roles to advocate on behalf of the individual. But I just look at it, I'm like, empower. That is like your word. You are an empowering caregiver. And I think that's important, because what you did is you didn't take away the decision from your daughter, especially. And I'd say that you advocated for her. And then as she got older, your focus was empowering her to be able to learn to make those decisions on her own with support.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because regardless of your age or your disability, of a terminal illness, I think that you want to empower the individual, because that individual has in their mind maybe feel this way. I don't want to speak for them, but when you feel so different than everyone else, sometimes it can be overwhelming, and you just want to give your decision to someone else.
Well, we'll get your response, Janet. But Nat, I mean, even to say it's not about a disability, but even for our mom who has Parkinson's, it is her, and I can speak for mom. She's ashamed, Janet. And I'll say that because she says, I don't want to go out in public because people stare at me. And that's Parkinson's. I mean, folks, I'm talking about she's like, I might fall, or they notice that I drag my feet, or she's unable to make facial expressions. So she always looks like she's frowning or her mouth is open. So I'm not talking about just a disability. I'm talking about people that are ill. And that's a society issue.
Yeah.
Like, it's not normal because people aren't normal when you're a childish or you're a bully that makes fun of people because they have an illness. I mean, that's fury for me. I'm like, come on, people, pull it together.
Different scares people. Anyway, let's let Janet talk.
Go ahead, Janet. Sorry, that was my soapbox, Janet.
I'm sitting here, and you ladies and anyone else listening will have to forgive me if I start tearing up.
Yeah.
But you just described the experiences of my daughter.
Yeah.
And you're both absolutely right, is that we as parents, we have responsibilities, and some, we kind of hover around them. We don't want them hurt and those kind of things. But I wanted her to have as normal of a life as she could, and teach her the skills and how to speak up for herself, and how to have conversations about things she wanted, not always what I wanted for her.
Yeah.
So that was what a lifetime was. And I knew that moment when I knew that she was able to do it for herself was on the day that she graduated, that she was to graduate from high school.
Heck yeah.
and I'm going to say, not with an IEP diploma.
That's right.
But with a regular high school diploma.
Yeah.
And we had talked about it, and I said, do you want to walk across the stage? And she said, yeah, I earned this. So I can remember one of the instructors, the special ed instructors, we met with her on the day of graduation, and we were kind of walking the area and everything. And she looked at my daughter and she said, we can just mail you your diploma. And forgive me, I don't mean to be rude to you ladies. My daughter looked at her and said, oh, hell no, you won't.
Absolutely.
And I knew at that moment that she had taken on the role of self-empowerment.
Absolutely.
Taken on the role of self-advocacy. And she looked at her and she looked at my daughter, and I said, and you're not going to say anything to her because she voiced her opinion.
Right.
And I said, what are you afraid of? And just listening to the two of you, listen to you, JJ, about your mom tripping or falling or whatever, and people staring. I looked at the teacher and I said, what are you scared of? Well, that she'll fall. And I said, then what we need to do is we need to talk about this, how to minimize the amount of walking that she has to do, make reasonable adaptations and accommodations, but she is walking across that stage.
Yeah.
So it was this big flight of stairs that may have had 200 steps to it that they all came down, but we had a wheelchair. She was at the bottom. She got in line with everybody in the wheelchair. She had an escort, came and sat down in the chairs. And when it came time for her to walk with her row, and she had an escort at the bottom of the stairs and up to the top of the stairs. And she walked across that stage.
Oh,
And it wasn't very far, but they had nailed down the boards because there was a trip hazard where the boards were sticking up. And we had good solid she was wearing good solid shoes with her orthotics. And she had her cane, and she tucked that cane up under her arm and reached out and got her diploma. The entire stadium stood.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then when she got the diploma and she walked across to the other side, the escort was on the other side with a wheelchair at the bottom of the stairs. And I knew at that moment that she was going to be able to advocate for herself and empower her. And we as caregivers of either family members or those friends or others that we're advocating for, we don't often say it, but we know it in our hearts and in our minds. We know that if we don't help them do that, or we don't help them speak for themselves and advocate for themselves, let them know what their rights are in decision-making opportunities, this world isn't going to take care of them like we do if something happens to us.
Yeah.
And when I talk to parents of children living with, or persons living with disabilities, or family member living with disabilities, we can say among ourselves, if we're talking about a confession, that we want our life to end before, we want their life to end before ours.
That's right.
We know that this world won't take care of them the way we do. And that's selfish. And that's egocentric. But
it's true. And I think if we're really honest, I so agree with you, Janet, because I think I have several friends who have adult children with disabilities, and that is their greatest fear, is that their children will outlive them. And it's because our society is not in a place to care for adult individuals with different abilities, and we don't do a great job with taking care of our aging folks.
No.
And so I think, for us, the podcast is so important because it's just another way to advocate and to get the word out, to say what you're feeling is that we validate you. And we want you to know that you can make change even as an individual. And Janet, you have made change as an individual on behalf of so many people. And I hold you in such high regard. I mean, voice and choice.
Yeah.
I appreciate both of you and what you're saying. And, I think about the last thing that I did for her to advocate. And that was and I won't make it lengthy, but we started before she, her life ended with a tragic accident, incident, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. We started working on handicap parking at one of our local government buildings, where she had to access.
Why not?
Access. Well, I mean,
but as far as you're like, I am going to take on parking at a government building, Janet.
Well, I was actually helping her because she asked me, she said, if I need to go in, I can't go across the parking lot. And there were 0 handicap parking spaces. And so for 6 months, I mean, we worked on it. And unfortunately, her life ended before we could see it come to fruition. Mm-hmm. And the one last thing that I wanted to do for her after she passed away was to make sure that her request was met. And I said, in I have to choose my words carefully, because I don't want to I want to work with persons. And I did everything that I could to go through the channels, to go through the proper conversations and everything. And still it was not done. And so my last conversation was, can you help me? And I said, if this isn't done, I said, at your next meeting, I will be bringing with me an ADA compliance officer who not only will look at the handicap parking, but they'll be looking at the other buildings as well. And I can't say enough for the 2 individuals I should say 3 individuals that ended up making that happen. And what I said to them, I said, no handicap parking gives a message to our older adults who need your services and access your services, to persons. And Natalie, I like the terminology used because I prefer that, differing abilities, no matter what age. And I said that gives a message to those persons with different abilities that they do not have access to your building freely. Yeah. And there were 3 particular entities that made that happen. And to this day, I'm grateful. But when they know that I start conversation, they know that we're going to talk about it reasonably, and that we're there because I'm doing my work of heart. That's who I am. And my mother would have used the phrase, if you look at my face, and you probably both can tell, My mother used a phrase, and Appalachian mothers use it, plumb eat up with it. All of my emotion, my heart shows, you know.
Oh, I don't hide my cards either. I'm all plumb eat up with it. Hey, ladies, I need to interrupt for just a second to share about the Sisterhood membership. It's basically a sale every day. And the best part, it's free. Here's the details. We're partnering with our friends at Benefit Hub and other care partners to save you money. With over 200,000 participating companies across the U.S. and abroad, you'll find discounts at your favorite local stores, huge savings on vacations, amazing deals on home, auto, and supplemental insurances, and everything in between. Go to confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com to sign up, and then definitely tell your friends about it. They can join too. Trust me, there's a discount for everyone. And don't forget, it's free. Okay, back to confessing.
So I have, oh, go ahead, Janet. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And I'm just, you know, when you ask about the caregiving role, my caregiving role for her ended when I brought her home, and she is in her own special treasure box in my home, along with my husband as well. Mm-hmm. He's in the old English tin where he kept his tea every day. And she is in her treasure box that was made special for her, with her cap and gown, with her wallet, her cell phone, and those personal things that she had on her every single day.
Her independence. And my role in support of caregivers will probably never end until I take my last breath. Oh, and who knows? I might do that whichever direction I go, but I'm confident that I'm going to be heading toward heaven because I'm building my house one brick at a time. Oh, I'm telling you right now, people, you can't see JJ and I, but we're all crying at this moment.
Janet and Natalie and I have a faith, and I'm going to tell you, when you stand before the Lord and he's going to say, you know, when he looks at you, he's going to say faithful servant, because each piece and each component that you just lay before him and say, these things I have tried and you have succeeded, because each little step that you have taken, you've just been a blessing to us. First of all, now Janet has to come back because we have not touched on a million things, especially. So we've talked about different abilities. We have not talked all about her husband. We have not talked about what you do for the aging. Yeah. Because that is such a component for us that we definitely, what you do there for people like my mom, we got to talk about that now.
Yeah, people need to understand it, because I'm going to tell you, the Agency on Aging is a powerhouse resource, and the people who are there are in it to support individuals. And I already have a person that had shared last night on Facebook about her journey, and she shared it so freely, so honest, so authentic. And all I can think in my heart is, I must help her. Yeah. And so I already said to JJ before we started, everybody, I'm like, I got to get her with Janet, because we are not alone. And I can tell you, this message was, I feel alone. And I'm like, and you know, people comment, and I'm thinking, I'm praying for you. Well, excuse me, damn it. I'm going to do more than pray for you. I'm going to help get you connected to some resources, because you're not alone, because the answered prayer is the resource. And so I believe that.
Yeah. And you know what? I want to say this before I forget it. I'm so grateful to the two of you because, you know, we all, as caregivers, we all have these stories, but when our loved ones that we've been caring for, when they leave this world, people stop talking about them. And this moment, this time, this morning, I'm so grateful to the two of you. Oh. I really am. And Natalie, you're making a good point. For them to know that they don't have to do it alone is is key. I'm sure both of you have heard when you're talking to persons, I know you may not know what I'm talking about, and then they find out you're a caregiver and you can look at it, especially when you're having a conversation with a different set of lenses.
That's right.
And you're pretty much validated, that, hey, you do know what I'm talking about. You've lived it, you've breathed it, you've experienced it. And that's what I, in my role now, get a chance to do is, do those things and be there for the residents and families. And
validate is all we really want. It is our human need to be to be in relationship and to be validated for being authentic and not fearful of being able that my relationship will be eliminated, terminated. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not this. We just want to be validated and say, yes, we see you. You're good enough.
Yeah.
You did well. So Jay, okay. So I know that we're long on this one, guys, but this was just so good.
She's coming back too. So
she's totally coming back.
She's got so much more to share and to teach us. Janet, you got some teaching to do.
I just keep sniffing because I'm pretty sure I got snot running out. So you're welcome for that. And
I keep wiping my nose, Janet.
We're all like tears and like my makeup. So this is worth looking at YouTube. But so, okay, JJ, we're going to do it real quick.
Okay.
We have sister questions. So JJ, what is your sister question you'd like to ask for Janet?
Okay, Janet, I still am going to ask it. What's your favorite caregiving story?
Oh, I love that.
Just a snippet of just a story that, just a funny little story, anything you got that you want to share with our audience.
Yeah. So the night before my husband passed away, and I must preface it with saying my husband was a contractor in England and he was exposed to asbestos, but he was also a smoker. So it was probably a combination. He was diagnosed on February the 14th and died 2 months later. That's how quick it was. But the night before his life ended, we had gone to the hospital because the main artery to his lung where the cancer was ruptured and threw him into it ruptured and so we needed to go to the hospital. And ultimately what ended up happening, it threw him into cardiac arrest. But, you're going to see, people can't see me smiling, but I'm going to smile about it. We went to the hospital and I carried like a bag. It was a quart bag full of nothing but blood. And the doctor in the ER, the internist, whoever I remember him still to this day. And that was 11 years ago. And he had run some tests and everything. And I looked at my husband and I said, and when we were serious, when I was serious, I would call him Michael. When we were just fooling around with each other, I called him Brennend. And he called me by my name when we first met, by Wilson, a loving terminology. And he looked at me and he goes, Jan. And that's what my close friends call me. Jan, don't cause any trouble. Now you have to understand, here I am, a long-term care ombudsman, advocating for quality of care, advocating for person-centered care. And I'm looking at him, I said, okay. I loved him that much and respected him that much. He too made me better than I would have been. So I looked at him and I said, Michael, they're keeping something from you. He is not telling you something. So the doctor comes back in. He must have heard me say it. And he goes, and what exactly do you think we're keeping? I said, well, first of all, what are the hematocrit and hemoglobin levels? Well, I don't know. Well, didn't you do labs? Well, yes. I said, you haven't seen that? And he goes, well, I can go look. And Michael leans into me, Jan, don't cause any trouble. I said, okay. So the doctor goes, gets the lab reports and throws the paper at me.
Wow.
And says, well, you decide what you want to do. And I said, thank you. I look at the paperwork and I look at Michael. I said, Michael, is it okay if I cause trouble now? Because let me show you what this lab says.
Yeah.
And he had bled out so much. There was little blood left in him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about it, and he looks at me and he goes, well, Jan, he said, you need to go home, because what had happened, I was caring for my daughter and him. He was in the hospital that Friday before this was a Monday night. My daughter had a massive seizure, so I was caring for her and him that whole weekend and onto that Monday. And I was sleeping on the floor between the two of them.
Mm.
And he goes, well, he said, go home, get you some rest, take care of Leanne, that's my daughter. And he said, you bring me back some clean jeans and a shirt. And he said, I'm going home. Today, I wonder which home he was talking about.
Mm.
And so when the doctor came back in, and I looked at him and I said, you haven't told him the truth, but he's made the decision that with your recommendation to stay overnight and monitor his hemoglobin levels, because I can see the lab reports and I know you have not been honest and truthful.
Mm.
I brought him home 2 days later in the tea tin, in the vintage antique tea tin where he kept his tea that he drank every day because he was a Brit.
Yeah.
I brought him home, and he can no longer tell me, Jan, don't cause any trouble.
It's like our dad would say, girls, be patient.
Be
With
patient.
your mother.
That was
And
his
so
word.
trust me. So I think that visual. So let me ask you one last question.
Yes.
What is your favorite guilty pleasure?
My favorite guilty pleasure?
Mm-hmm.
This is a tough question.
Is turning the music up as loud as I can get it.
Ooh.
Dancing in the kitchen when I'm baking.
Ooh.
Yeah, baking or making. Now, let me back up. But it's the music in the background and everything. Because Michael and I prefer different kinds of music.
Yeah.
Now, I love Andre Bocelli.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just has a beat to it. But my one guilty pleasure, I'm just confessing, to be honest.
Ready.
Is making homemade candies that instead of using store-bought flavoring, I will jack them up. If I'm making limoncello truffles, it's got limoncello liqueur in it.
Absolutely.
If I'm making rum balls, it's got pure.
Absolutely.
Look at you. You want a gift from Janet.
And if I'm making anything that requires homemade vanilla or requires vanilla, I don't do store-bought. I make my own with 100 proof vodka.
Now that is a guilty confession.
So Janet will be over for Christmas.
Janet's coming for Christmas. You can put your orders in now. Well, you know what?
Yeah, and and one that I tried, but it was for adults only. You know the traditional peanut butter balls that we make?
Ooh.
Everybody loves. I jacked it up with screwball whiskey.
Okay, so we would like everybody to know Janet will be opening her own dessert shop next year.
And also, must be 21 and older.
We want to thank Janet so much for coming on, Natalie. I've had a blast, but everybody needs to know that Janet is coming back because
she's totally coming
she's a
back.
blessing, but she's got so much more to tell you for the work that she does. She's got so much more to tell you about the resources that she offers. We'll also have some stuff in our show notes about resources. She has some great resources as well on our website, just different checklists and things for aging and for just
for your home, for safety,
for your home, everything.
Oh, it's great. So she's given us a ton, and we've
absolutely
shared on our website.
Absolutely. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Janet. We love you.
Yep. I love you ladies too. I'll remember you at Christmas time.
Oh, girl, you know it. All right, guys, have a wonderful Tuesday.
Thanks, ladies.
Well, friends, that's a wrap on this week's confession. Again, thank you so much for listening. But before you go, please take a moment to leave us a review and tell your friends about the Confessions podcast. Don't forget to visit our website to sign up for our newsletter. You'll also find the video recording of all of our episodes on the Confessions website and our YouTube channel. Don't worry, all the details are included in the show notes below. We'll see you next Tuesday when we come together to confess again. Till then, take care of you. Okay, let's talk disclaimers. You may be surprised to find out, but we are not medical professionals and are not providing any medical advice. If you have any medical questions, we recommend that you talk with a medical professional of your choice. As always, my sisters and I at Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver have taken care in selecting the speakers, but the opinions of our speakers are theirs alone. The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of the Sisterhood of Care, LLC.